Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome to my book corner. Today we're looking at one of the books that was voted for recently for me to read, Wranglestone by Darren Charlton. This is a young adult novel that came out in February of 2020. So, as always, we're going to take a look at the story and the characters. However, I am going to start this one with world building in a moment because I think that's quite important, otherwise I'm going to spoil the story and we don't want to do that. We'll then hit the positives, the negatives, and my final thoughts, so let's just throw ourselves at the horde on this one. I'm starting with world building because it's quite hard to talk about the story here without spoiling it, and the world building will help inform what's going on. So first things first, this is a post-apocalypse. A virus has wiped out the majority of mankind, and there's only small pockets of survivors out and about now. And the virus has basically caused people to die and become zombies. Or at least it would appear that they've become mindless zombies. This is set on a series of small islands in the middle of a lake in a national park in America called Wranglestone. And it's coming up to winter, and the lake is going to freeze, so they have people who go out and help to draw the dead away from the shore so they never try to cross. They have other defences as well in case the odd one does try, but that's the main way they survive. They use people basically as bait to draw the dead away. And you have a few different rituals here, so rituals for the winter and the summer in terms of keeping morale high or keeping them safe, but also a ritual around what happens when people get bitten, because when they get bitten they get infected and they die and they become zombies and they'll eat you. And the way they did this is there was a strange man in the woods, and there was one person within the community that would walk the bitten person there before they turned, fix them to a rock or a tree and leave them there for the man to take away. It's not made clear at that point what happens to them. We do find out a bit later on. Unfortunately, the person who does this actually gets bitten, but quite early on in the book, and it's Pete that walks him to the place, does as he's told, leaves him, and ends up taking that job for his own. He walks a few different people there over time. The world building here is solid, and it's important to help frame the narrative for this one, and that'll become clear as to why shortly, especially in terms of some of the twists that are going to go on. But this is a world that is barely surviving and has sort of regressed in many regards. One thing I do like, however, which is touched on in here, is that a lot of the old prejudices that we still see today are now gone. So people don't bat an eyelid at things like sexual preferences, race, gender. That isn't even considered anymore because we're all just human, and there's a bigger threat. This isn't a threat to us, and that's a great thing, and it's one of the strongest points that comes across in here. So that being said, we have the story itself, and the story is told from the point of view of Pete. Pete is very much a young man who is overly trusting, and this involves him putting the community in danger when he lets some people onto the island and nearly dies. He is, as punishment, sent out to act as a wrangler to help draw the dead away alongside Cooper. Cooper has been doing this job for years, and Pete has a bit of a crush on him, and as it turns out, Cooper feels the same way about Pete, and they spend a load of time together. They become romantically and physically engaged, and romance blossoms. There's not a huge amount to the romance past that, however. Also, Pete ends up being the one who walks people to their ending with the stranger in the woods. However, when someone really close to him gets bitten, he can't leave them like he's supposed to, and he gets knocked out and left for dead in the clearing to be eaten by the dead. And then some things happen or don't happen depending on how you choose to look at it, and it becomes clear that not everything that you're told at the start of the book about the dead and the stranger in the woods and staying safe is quite what it appears to be. And what happens then is Pete goes off to try and find his friend to find out what really happened to them, and he begins to unpeel like a conspiracy within the village of what's really going on. It's nothing you haven't seen before, but it is a solid framework for the story this is telling, so decent stuff all round, to be fair. Pete is the main character here, and he gets the most character development, but I'm going to be honest, the character development in this isn't great. This is more about the story it's trying to tell rather than the characters. There is a romance angle with him and Cooper, which is fine but not particularly deep, and the characters overall are very little more than surface level. You do have the arc of Pete slowly but surely uncovering the various different secrets and conspiracy that's going on, and his sort of arc of becoming a man in many regards. It's almost a coming of age story for him, but you don't really get a sense of time or development. It feels like big jumps between each point, and for me that is the biggest problem with this book. The characterization just isn't as strong as I would like it to be, although it does do enough to keep the story engaging, and it does explain some of the actions that happen later on in the book in terms of the decisions that Pete makes and why he goes looking for his friend and how he deals with various different situations as he sort of hardens as a character in many regards, still believes in love, is still quite trusting, and is still willing to accept people, but he gets a harder edge to him, and that's needed for what he's going through. But overall, the characterization and the characters in here are quite lacking. There is quite a big ensemble cast as well. You don't get much time with them, so they are quite often one-note personalities beyond Pete, Cooper, and Pete's dad as well. There are some little twists in there which do make sense with some of the ancillary characters, however, but overall this was lacking a little bit for that. What's good? So the first thing is that this is a solid story that it's trying to tell. It has got an interesting twist to it, and it's not particularly signposted, so it can take you a little bit out of left field, but it is an interesting twist and you can make it make sense. Also, this is an easy book to read in many regards. This is what I call a popcorn book. Ecogenesis a few months ago fitted into this as well. I could blast through this in a day. It took me a little bit longer because I made myself slow down, so I caught stuff, but it's an easy read. On top of that, whilst I would have preferred more depth to it, the romance between Cooper and Pete is quite sweet as well, and I enjoyed that aspect of the story, and the sort of sense of wonder that you see through Cooper's eyes on like the outside world and the expanses and the wilderness is pretty well done as well. There are, however, several negatives here. Whilst the story is solid and it has good twists in there, the plotting is a little bit sporadic at best, a bit all over the place. And the biggest problem I had with it is I couldn't tell when I was in the story at times. You had no true sense of how much time had passed. And this kind of undercuts some of the emotional moments because you never really got the investment as much in characters as perhaps you should have done. And whilst, as I mentioned, I liked the relationship between Pete and Cooper, I didn't feel the emotional attachment to it like I like to feel with romantic attachments in books, so that fell a little bit flat for me. It also covers some rather dark themes at some points in this book. I don't want to go into them here because I don't want to spoil anything. The problem I have is not that it's touching on these themes, because actually they're quite interesting themes to touch in regards to the twists of the story, but they're kind of hand-waved away, so it feels like they could have just been ejected from the story altogether and no difference would have been made. The other thing, and it touches again on characters, is I would have liked more time with the community in the book, as Whilst the twists are clever and smart and make sense with the personalities we see, we only get very limited time with any of those personalities, so you never develop any emotional investment in this book at any point. Now, there is a follow-up to this called Timberdark, and I am wondering if, because this, like is often the case, feels like a setup, if that'll pay off better, and I will be reading it to find out. But yeah, they're the negatives for this one. So overall, my thoughts. This is a tough one because I really wanted to like this, and it was an easy read, and I will probably read it again, and I'm definitely going to read the follow-up. But this can't go above C tier because the character work is too slight, and the themes that this looks at doesn't really look at in any true depth, and it kind of hand waves them away a little bit. And I think that's a shame because I think there's a really interesting premise here for the book, and I don't think it quite does it justice. That being said, we'll have a look at Timberdark at some point in the future. My TBR is ridiculous at the moment, but we will get to it, and maybe it'll pay off there. But have you read this? What did you think of it? Let me know in the comments below, and I will catch you next time.